Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're jumping into the world of the Grammys,
Ooh, the Grammys.
but with a twist.
Okay, I like twists.
We're time traveling to two very specific years, 2012 and 2022.
Sounds fun.
And instead of just listing who won what, we're going to use these two snapshots to see how music trends evolved.
Oh, so like how the industry itself changed just by looking at how Grammy categories shifted over time?
Exactly. So first off, 2022, and looking at the categories here.
Okay.
And it's a mix of the familiar, album of the year, record of the year, song of the year.
Right, the classics.
But then there's some that really make you go, huh. Like Best Immersive Audio Album.
Ooh, now that's got to be a sign of the times, right? Technology changing how we listen.
Right. 10 years before that category wouldn't have even existed.
Makes you wonder what new categories they'll come up with in the future.
Does it? Okay, so let's get specific now. 2022 nominees. Alicia Keys was up for Best Immersive Audio Album for Alicia.
Interesting.
But what's cool is she was also nominated for Best R&B Album that same year.
Showing she's not afraid to experiment.
Exactly. Pushing boundaries. And, she didn't win either of those in 2022.
Yeah.
But she's no stranger to those golden gramophones.
Oh, definitely not. She's a 15-time Grammy winner, going all the way back to 2002.
15 times. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so who else was making waves in 2022?
Well, one name that really stands out is Jean-Baptiste.
Oh, yeah, he had a big year.
Huge GE. He took home 5 awards, including Album of the Year for We Are.
Wow, that's got to be a career highlight.
For sure, especially when you look at who he was up against.
Okay, spill the tea. Who else was nominated for Album of the Year in 2022?
Oh, it's a stacked category. You had Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga for Love for Sale.
A powerhouse duo.
Then Doja Cat for Planet Her. Billie Eilish for Happier Than Ever.
All huge names.
And HER for Back of My Mind.
Wow, that's a really diverse group of artists.
Which I think really reflects how much the music scene had broadened by 2022.
So for Jean-Baptiste to win against that competition,
Yeah.
his music must have really resonated with voters.
It did. We Are is such a unique blend of jazz, soul, R&B. And it had this really strong message of unity and hope.
And that was a time when the world really needed that kind of message.
Exactly. It was released when we were still dealing with the pandemic and a lot of social and political turmoil. So I think people were drawn to that sense of resilience and just the pure joy in his music.
It's amazing how music can provide comfort during tough times.
It really is. Music has this power to tap into our emotions and create a shared experience, even when everything else feels chaotic.
Okay, so we talked about immersive audio R&B jazz.
Yeah.
But let's switch gears for a sec to a genre that might be a bit more niche.
Okay, shoot.
Best Regional Mexican Music Album.
Ah, yes.
Vicente Fernandez posthumously won for his album A Miss 80s.
A legend.
It's a reminder that the Grammys also recognize legacies that transcend time.
Absolutely. Vicente Fernandez was an icon in Mexican music, known for his powerful vocals and his contributions to ranchera music, a genre that's so deeply rooted in Mexican culture.
And for him to win even after his passing.
It's a testament to his lasting impact.
It's beautiful how music can connect with people on such a deep level, across generations even.
It speaks to music's power to go beyond language and cultural barriers.
So we've covered immersive audio R&B, jazz ranchera music.
A real mix.
The 2022 Grammys were a real celebration of diversity.
Definitely. And that reflects how technology and culture were changing the music industry.
Okay, so are you ready for a little time travel? Let's rewind back to 2012.
Back to the days when dubstep was taking over the world.
Dubstep. I remember that word being everywhere, but I'm not sure I could actually explain what it says.
Oh, it's a genre of electronic dance music that came out of South London in the late 90s.
Okay.
The syncopated rhythms, heavy bass, often distorted sounds, like a darker, more experimental cousin of house music.
Ah, okay, now I remember. So is there like a separate Grammy category for dubstep back then?
Not a separate category, no. But its influence was definitely being felt in the electronic music categories.
I bet. And just looking at the overall categories from 2012, they're strikingly different from 2022.
For sure.
Obviously, they both have the core categories, Album of the Year, Record of the Year. Those seem to be a constant.
Yeah, the big ones.
But I'm curious about the more specialized categories. How did those differ?
Well, in 2012, you had categories like Best Pop Solo Performance and Best Rock Solo Vocal Performance.
Okay.
But fast forward to 2022, those had become Best Pop Performance and Best Rock Performance, broader,
So let's focus on the solo artist and more about collaborations and different performance styles.
Exactly. It shows how the music industry itself was transforming.
Makes sense. Technology was changing how music was made, making it easier to collaborate and blend genres.
All reflected in how those Grammy categories evolved.
Okay, so let's dive into some 2012 nominees. Adele pretty much dominated that year.
Oh yeah, she swept the awards.
Album of the Year and Song of the Year for 21 and Rolling in the Deep.
Those were huge hits.
Still classics today.
And you know that Album of the Year win for 21? That was actually her second time winning in that category. Yep. First win was in 2011 for 19, and then she went on to win again in 2017 for 25.
So she's a 3-time Album of the Year winner.
One of the few artists to achieve that.
Wow, Grammy magnet. Okay, but besides Adele, who else was racking up nominations in 2012?
Well, Kanye West was a major contender that year. He had 7 nominations.
7?
That's a lot.
Including Album of the Year for My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Which, even though it didn't win that year,
Right.
it's still considered one of the most influential albums of this century.
For sure. And even though he didn't win Album of the Year, he still took home 5 awards that night.
Mostly in the rap categories, I'm guessing.
You got it.
Yeah.
But his nominations spanned rap, rock, contemporary, R&B, showed his creative range.
So Adele's dominating the pop scene. Kanye's making waves across genres. What else was big in 2012? Any other artists or trends that really stand out?
Well, Bruno Mars won Best Pop Vocal Album for Doo-Wops and Hooligans.
Oh, yeah, that was a great album.
And he's another artist who kept finding success at the Grammys. He went on to win Album of the Year in 2018 for 24K Magic. It's cool to see how these artists evolve over time and just keep making great music.
It is. And speaking of evolution, 2012 was a big year for electronic dance music, or EDM as it's better known.
Oh yeah, EDM was exploding back then.
And artists like Skrillex, who won 3 Grammys that year, were really pushing boundaries and bringing EDM into the mainstream.
Skrillex. I remember Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites. That was everywhere.
Oh, yeah. And those wins were a sign that the Grammys were starting to recognize EDM's growing popularity.
And its artistic merit.
Absolutely. It was a turning point for the genre.
Okay, so we've talked about the big names, the trends, but were there any nominations in 2012 that maybe flew under the radar a bit?
Oh, for sure. There are always hidden gems.
Any that you think deserve a shout out?
Definitely. In the Best Americana Album category, Gillian Welch was nominated for her album The Harrow and the Harvest.
Gillian Welch. Now, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. What's her music like?
Oh, she's phenomenal. A songwriter with deep roots in folk and bluegrass, The Harrow and the Harvest is just beautiful, showcases her talent so well.
Americana music. I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with that genre. What are the key elements?
It's kind of like a melting pot of American roots music, folk, country, blues, rock.
Okay.
But it's more than just genres. It's about storytelling authenticity, a focus on American themes and experiences.
So for Gillian Welch to be nominated for Best Americana Album.
It shows her ability to weave those traditions together and tell these compelling stories through her music.
And she's been nominated for multiple Grammys over the years.
She has. But she hasn't won one yet.
Which just goes to show that sometimes critical acclaim and artistic influence aren't always measured in awards.
So true. Ready for another hidden gem from 2012?
Always.
Okay, this one's in the Best New Age Album category. Peter Cater was nominated for his album Light of the Sun.
New Age music. I always think of like spas and meditation when I hear that.
Well, it can be relaxing and meditative for sure, but it's more than just spa music. It often incorporates ambient, electronic, and world music.
To create these immersive soundscapes.
Exactly. And Peter Cater is a great example. He uses piano synthesizers, nature sounds, to make these really moving and thought-provoking pieces.
Okay, I'm definitely adding him to my listening list.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here in both 2012 and 2022. The big winners, the rising stars, the hidden gems, across all these different genres.
We have.
I'm starting to get a sense of how the music landscape was changing during that decade.
Yeah, it's all starting to come together.
So are you ready for the really interesting part?
I think so. Hit me with it.
Let's compare these 2 Grammy years side by side.
Okay.
And see if we can spot the key trends that shaped the music of a decade.
Let's do it. I love a good comparison.
Me too. It's going to be fun.
I'm ready when you are. Okay, so we've explored these 2 Grammy years, 2012 and 2022, and now it's time for the fun part.
I like fun. What is it?
Let's play Spot the Difference. What were some of the biggest shifts you noticed between those 2 years?
Spot the difference. Okay, well, one thing that really jumps out at me is the evolution of the categories. Like in 2012, a lot of awards were super solo artist-centric.
Right.
But then by 2022, it was all about collaborations and different performance styles. Almost like a move from the individual to the collective.
Exactly. And that shift mirrors how the music industry itself was changing. Technology made it easier for artists to collaborate remotely, blend genres.
True. And I think streaming services played a big role too, like Spotify and Apple Music.
Oh, for sure.
Suddenly, it wasn't just about radio hits anymore.
Yeah.
Niche genres could thrive. Global collaborations became easier.
Right. It really broadened the musical landscape.
It did. It's fascinating how technology and culture intertwine like that.
It is. Streaming not only democratized music consumption, but also influenced how artists create and collaborate, like a ripple effect.
And speaking of evolution, let's talk about the artists who were nominated in both years. That's where you really see the changes in action.
Okay, good point. Who are we thinking of?
Well, Bruno Mars is a great example.
Oh, yeah, he's a good one.
In 2012, his sound was very pop-driven, catchy melodies, retro vibes. But by 2022, he'd added more funk, soul, even disco influences.
Especially in 24K Magic.
Yeah. It's like he was mirroring the genre-bending trends happening around him.
And his style evolved, too. Remember those Starp suits and fedora hats from 2012?
Oh, yeah. By 2022, he was rocking that flamboyant 70s-inspired
It's like he embraced a bolder, more experimental aesthetic.
musically and visually.
And I think that shift wasn't just about fashion. Lyrical themes changed, too. Like in 2012, a lot of songs were about heartbreak, romantic love.
Yeah, the classic theme.
But by 2022, artists were exploring more socially conscious themes.
Speaking of socially conscious themes, was 2022 the year protest music made a comeback?
Absolutely. There was a resurgence of artists using their music to speak out on important issues, a response to the turbulent times.
Yeah, it was a way for them to connect with their audiences on a deeper level, inspire change.
Exactly. Music as a form of activism.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so we've talked about categories and artists, but let's zoom out even further.
I'm following you.
Were there any overarching themes or trends that really defined each year? Like, what was the essence of 2012 versus 2022, musically speaking?
That's a great question. For 2012, I think it was all about that transition from physical albums to digital downloads and streaming.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. The industry was figuring out how to adapt.
Exactly. It was a time of disruption.
And musically, I'd say 2012 was peak, super polished, radio-friendly pop.
Yeah, big catchy choruses, slick production.
Then by 2022, you see the fruits of that digital disruption. Streaming opened the floodgates for so many sounds and genres.
Right. It was the era of the playlist.
Yeah, you could jump from hip-hop to K-pop to indie folk.
All in one sitting.
Endless possibilities.
And don't forget those surprise collaborations. It seemed like every week there was a new one.
Oh, yeah. Those were fun. Artists were constantly pushing boundaries and experimenting.
So in a way, 2012 was about laying the groundwork.
And 2022 was about reaping the rewards of that digital revolution.
It's cool to see how those threads connect. It really is. So what's the takeaway from all this? What did we learn from our little Grammy time travel adventure?
That's a good question.
What do you think?
I think the biggest takeaway is that music is a reflection of its time.
Oh, I agree.
The categories, the artists, the themes, it all speaks to what was happening culturally and technologically. It's like a mirror to society.
You're so right. Music is this living, breathing entity that's constantly changing and evolving.
A snapshot of who we are as a society.
And that makes it so exciting to think about the future. What sounds will define the next decade? What do you think will be winning Grammys in 2032?
Ooh, now that's a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already picturing holographic performances and albums composed entirely by AI.
Oh, wow.
Maybe we'll even have a category for Best Interplanetary Music Album.
Huh. Who knows? But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a wild ride.
Oh, I'm sure of it. But for now, let's ground ourselves back in the present.
Back to reality.
We've journeyed through a decade of music-explored trends, unearthed hidden gems.
It's been quite a journey.
And I think it's only fair that we end this deep dive with some musical recommendations.
Yes, a little something to spark our listeners' own musical exploration.
Okay, so for 2012, I'm going to recommend 21 by Adele.
A classic.
Those powerhouse vocals, the raw emotion. It's an album that truly captures the spirit of 2012.
Excellent choice. And for 2022, I'm recommending Motomami by Rosalia.
Oh, nice.
It's bold experimental blends, flamenco, reggaeton, electronic music. It really shows how diverse and genre-bending music became by then.
Rosalia is such an innovator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, folks, there you have it.
2 incredible albums.
From 2 distinct years in music history. Now go forth and listen.
And keep an ear out for the sounds of the future. Who knows what musical gems are waiting to be discovered?
That's right. This is just the beginning of your musical journey. Until next time, happy listening.
Oh, before we move on from 2012, I just remembered something.
What's that?
Remember how we talked about Bon Iver being nominated for Best New Artist that year?
Oh, yeah, that was interesting, because they weren't exactly newcomers at that point.
Right. They'd already released For Emma forever ago, back in 2008.
which is a huge critical success.
It was. So even though they got that Best New Artist nomination in 2012, they'd actually been around for a while.
So their 2012 self-titled album, that was more like their breakout moment into the mainstream.
Exactly. Wider reach, more polished sound, which is probably what led to that nomination.
So it was more about them reaching a new level of recognition, not being brand new to the scene.
Right. It's a good example of how the Grammys sometimes play catch-up, you know?
Yeah. Like they're recognizing an artist's impact, even if it didn't all happen within that specific Grammy eligibility period.
It happens sometimes. The music industry is full of those unpredictable journeys.
It makes you wonder how many other artists have had those kinds of experiences.
Oh, I'm sure there are plenty. Flying under the radar for a while and then, bam, they hit the mainstream.
Okay, so we talked about the big winners, the trends, the categories. But were there any other 2012 nominees that maybe deserve a shout-out?
Oh, absolutely. Plenty of hidden gems.
Any that stand out to you?
Let's see. In the Best Alternative Music Album category, there was a nomination for M83's Hurry Up, We're Dreaming.
M83. Oh, I remember that album. Very dreamy, almost cinematic.
It was a blend of shoegaze, synth-pop electronic music with this sense of nostalgia and yearning.
I remember some of those tracks were used in movie trailers and commercials.
They were. It really captured a specific mood and aesthetic.
Definitely had a unique sound.
Speaking of unique sounds, how about some jazz?
Oh, yeah, I love jazz. What are we thinking of?
Esperanza Spalding was nominated for Best Jazz Vocal Album for her album Radio Music Society.
Esperanza Spalding. Didn't she win Best New Artist a few years before that?
You have a great memory. She did. In 2011, she was actually the first jazz musician to ever win in that category.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was. And then she came back in 2012 with Radio Music Society.
Which really showcased her incredible voice and her ability to blend jazz with other genres.
Yeah. Funk, soul, even some pop influences in there.
So she wasn't afraid to experiment.
Not at all. A true innovator, and Radio Music Society actually won a Grammy for Best Instrumental Arrangement Accompanying Vocalists.
So her music was resonating with voters across categories?
It was. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. We time traveled through a decade of music, from the polished pop of 2012 to the more experimental sounds of 2022.
It's amazing how much can change in just 10 years.
And we saw how the Grammys reflect those changes.
And how individual artists can really shape the musical landscape.
Really makes you wonder what the next decade will bring.
Doesn't it? Maybe we'll be doing another deep dive into the 2032 Grammys 10 years from now.
I hope so. But for now, I think we should wrap things up.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey.
It has. We've explored trends, unearthed hidden gems, and I think we've learned a lot about how music evolves and reflects the times we live in.
I agree. And I think the biggest takeaway for our listeners is that music is a constant source of discovery and surprise.
So keep listening, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone.
You never know what musical gems you might find.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, everyone.
This was fun. Until next time.
Happy listening.